Welcome to Beyond the Reiki Gateway, a podcast reserved for the spiritually curious. Journey further with Reiki Masters Kathleen Johnson and Andrea Kennedy through in-depth conversations, many featuring inspiring and intriguing special guests to enrich your unique spiritual progression. Thank you for joining us Beyond the Reiki Gateway. I'm Andrea Kennedy here with my co-host Kathleen Johnson. We have a special guest in our studio today, Kirsty Salisbury. She's a podcaster, an author, and an end-of-life supporter exploring the topics of life, death, and experiences in between. Following her own near-death experience at 12 years of age, Kirsty's passionate about widening the conversation around death and the afterlife. Through her podcast, called Let's Talk Near Death, Kirsty shares personal stories of life after near death and events of significant spiritual transformation. As a trained end-of-life doula, Kirsty supports both individuals and their families to consider what death might look like and to journey through that process. Kirsty, we're thrilled to have you all the way from New Zealand. We're so excited to get into this subject matter with you.
Oh, thank you, ladies. It's great to be here. And yes, we're talking about my favorite topics. So I'm excited to get into this.
So are we. And for the listeners, I think we should mention that this was kind of a hard-won episode, right? We've been trying to get you on for what, almost 3 months now?
It's been a bit up and down. We've had so many things. We've had some floods here. We've had some cyclones. We've had all sorts of weather events, and the internet's not very reliable when you've got these things going on. So many things, but here we are. We made it.
Here we are, finally, and we are thrilled. So, Kirsty, I have a question. One of the things that struck me when I read your bio was that you had your own personal experience with near death at the age of 12. That is really something. Would you care to elaborate on that and tell our audience and us all about that?
Sure, no problem. So yes, 12 years old, so quite young. I was just living a normal life. I was a very active child, very, very active, in fact. I was a competitive gymnast at the time, and I loved to be bouncing around the place. I loved jumping on trampolines, spinning upside down. My whole life at the age of 12 was focused on competing as a gymnast, and the more active I could be, the better. And it was a lunchtime at school, and I was outside, which you'd always find me in the playground at lunchtime, swinging on bars or walking on my hands or doing something like that, because this was just my passion. And this one particular day, I ended up standing up a bit too fast. I was swinging on bars, stood up too fast, and I hit my head onto the bar. And ouch, it was enough for me to not continue that lunchtime, but it wasn't bad enough for me to think I'd done anything too wrong. You know, I didn't knock myself out. There was no concussion or anything specific. So I thought, oh, I've banged my head. I better just calm down for a bit. Went back to class, finished the school day, had a completely normal afternoon. And then it's quite hard to actually define when it all started to happen. But within 24 to 48 hours, I started to get quite tired, quite fatigued. And I remember going to bed. So I'm not sure if it was the same evening or it was the following evening. I went to bed and I was tired, and I woke up in the middle of the night and I had just the most pounding headache. It was very, very painful, very sharp pain. And I remember lying there in my bed in the middle of the night in the dark, thinking something's really wrong. This headache is so unusual, so specific. And I remember thinking I can pinpoint the pain. And then I thought, oh, I don't feel so well. I've got a migraine, probably something like that. I need to get up and go to the bathroom. So I tried to get up, and I got out of bed, and I promptly collapsed on the floor. I lay there for a little bit thinking I'd get back up, but my body wasn't working. And I started to think something's really not right here. I've got this headache, I feel sick, and I couldn't get myself back up off the floor. So I kept trying, and I can remember lying on the floor and pulling on the leg of the bed. And I remember hanging on to that and trying to pull myself up. And I kept collapsing because my body just didn't work. And I didn't understand why. And I obviously was making a bit of noise. So my mother came in, "What are you doing in the middle of the night making all this noise?" And then she saw me on the floor and freaked out. And I said, "Mum, I don't feel well." She got me up. I remember walking with her and her kind of holding my weight, getting me eventually into the spare bedroom. So my bedroom was next to the spare bedroom, which had a big double bed in it. And my mother took me in there to be with me for the evening. And I remember lying in the bed and hearing this internal voice saying, "Don't go to sleep." And I was very confused and I was very, very tired by this point. But I don't know where this voice is. I don't know who it is. I don't know where it's coming from, but it's there. And so I try so incredibly hard not to go to sleep. And I can't fight the tiredness. The tiredness is coming and coming and it's getting stronger. And eventually I guess I fell asleep. The next morning, my parents can't wake me up. I'm in a coma. I'm unconscious. And they have no clue what's going on. So they phone the doctor and the doctor comes round and he does a few little tests on me. And he says, "We've got to get her straight to hospital." They got me there straight into the operating room. They did some scans and they found out that my brain was actually bleeding. So when I'd hit my head, they were operating to remove the bleed in the brain, basically. I flatlined twice on the operating table. And I have no idea when my experience took place, whether it was when that voice was saying to me, "Don't go to sleep," and whether it was when I was in the coma at the beginning, or whether it happened when I flatlined on the operating table. I have no idea where this took place. But at some point, I ended up in this space of nothingness. Now, nothingness isn't really a way to describe it. There was everything and nothing all at the same time. It was empty, but it was full. I don't know. It wasn't light. It wasn't dark. I don't have the words to describe where I was, but I was in this place of nothingness. And I'm feeling a bit confused as to where am I? What's going on? I ended up having a massive stroke with the surgery, and that's probably why I couldn't get back up into the bed, is because at that point I'd probably had the stroke. We don't know. But over my right hand shoulder, I heard this voice and it was saying, "You have to connect with me. You have to connect, squeeze my hand. You have to let me know you're going to be okay." And I was thinking, I'm okay. I'm fine. But where are you? And what is this? And how does this all work? And it started to get desperate, this voice of, "You need to let me know you're going to be okay. You need to connect with me." And it was my father's voice. And I was thinking, but I'm fine. So I wanted to just turn around and say I'm okay and almost like grab his hand and squeeze his hand. I couldn't find him. I couldn't find my father. I couldn't find my hand to be able to squeeze his hand. I couldn't find him. I never saw him physically. It was like there was an essence of him there, but I could hear his voice very clearly. I could feel the desperation in his voice saying, "Connect with me, let me know you're going to be okay." And the desperation was building and building and building to the point where I felt like if I don't connect with him and let him know I'm okay, life will never be okay. And it started to feel so much bigger than me and my father. It felt like the whole world, time, the universe, everything going forward was involved. And so I started to get a bit desperate as well, but I just couldn't. I just could not find it. And then I thought, okay, I have to give everything for this. This might actually be the end of me. I might need to give my whole life to connect with him and I might die as a result. And I never considered that maybe I was already dead. Maybe I was in between life and death. That wasn't on my radar. I had zero concept of what might be happening in a different place. I was just in this moment. And so I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to give everything to this. I have to do this. And I can't even understand what that means. It almost feels like it's a bit big-headed to say the whole universe was relying on me to be able to connect with him. But I'm telling you how it felt. I remember counting down and going, okay, this might be the end. 3, 2, 1, and giving all of my energy, if I could funnel all of my energy into squeezing my father's hand. And it's like the hands were there and there was a twitch in the finger And again, I can't even explain this because it doesn't make sense. The twitch in the finger. And then it was like a booming, silent, which doesn't make sense either, white light. And I go from this place of utter nothingness to white, pure, amazing light. It's like I'm in this place and it's warm and it's loving and there's energy. And I felt like it was almost in vibrations, kind of like waves of the sea. This energy was just coming and it was beautiful. And I'm surrounded by white light. And I didn't transport there. It's not like I traveled. I was just there. It just came up. And I notice around me are some, I'm going to call them beings. When I first came back, I called them the silhouette people. They were beings around me. There was probably, I'm going to say 7 or 8. Very hard to actually pinpoint or define. But I'm guessing there were about 7 or 8. That's what I remember. And they were around me, almost like in a circle. But I didn't feel like there were any behind me. And I'm thinking, who are these people? They've got no features. They are just there. They're cheering and they're clapping. And they're so happy that I'm there. And it's like a big party, like a big celebration, because I'm there in this white light. And I'm not aware of anything but the current place where I am. And I think, who are these people? And I start to try and focus on where their faces would be because they were just silhouettes. And I can't see any details. I can't see facial features. I can't see, they've got no light on their face. The harder I try to zone in and look at their features, the more I can't. And I had this feeling that I wasn't permitted to. I wasn't allowed to know who these people were. So were they people? I don't know. They were beings of some sort. They were quite human. I assume they were human. I assume there were people there to greet me. But I'm thinking, why are they so happy? It was all about me being there, and these people were celebrating my arrival. And I had the feeling that beyond me, it was just so big beyond this immediate scene, and where the energy and the wave of energy is coming just felt amazing. And then the next thing I know, I'm waking up and I'm in the critical care unit of Auckland Hospital here in New Zealand. And I've got tubes everywhere. There's machines beeping. It's all go. The nurses rush in because I've woken up. And I'm feeling great. I'm thinking, wait a minute, where did the white light go? Where are those beings? Who were they? This is heavy. What is going on? And I realize that I've woken up and the nurses are there and they're so kind and they're saying, look, you're in hospital. You haven't been very well. Just take it easy. Just, take your time. And I'm thinking, gosh, they must think I'm an idiot. They must think I'm so stupid to think that I don't know where I am. They don't know what's just gone through, what I've gone through. Because it was kind of like I knew everything that had happened. And they didn't need to explain to me what had happened. It was just how it was. And I understood everything that was going on. And at the same time, I'm very connected with my parents. And I remember feeling like my father was getting in the car. So he was alive at the time, even though he was in my experience. And I'm aware of my mother and I'm thinking, oh, they're going to come and see me. And that's going to be exciting. I couldn't wait to see them. But yeah, the nurse is trying to explain things to me and I'm thinking, I'm fine. Everything's okay. You can take all these tubes out. So I'm trying to pull things out my nose and all sorts of things. And they go, no. They said, you've been really, really unwell. I don't think you realize how bad it's been. And I'm going, but I'm fine. We're okay. Don't worry about it. I don't need these anymore because I knew in that moment that everything would be okay. Absolutely everything was fine. I knew I had a bit of a journey ahead of me, but everything was exactly as it was meant to be. And so what happened was I had an AVM, which is an arterial venous malformation, which basically means that before I was born or somewhere along that process of being created, my brain didn't form correctly. So just like if you think of somebody and maybe they have a malformed hand or finger's not quite right, or people have issues with their toes, things like that, my brain had a few little issues in it where it didn't form correctly when I was in the womb. I'd probably lived my whole life with that. It didn't cause me any harm. And so I had those little malformations in my brain. And by hitting my head on the bars at school, they think it just dislodged something enough to cause an issue. And for the blood pressure to then begin to build, the pressure built so much that it burst, the brain bled, which is what can happen with these. This is kind of like worst case scenario, is if an AVM ruptures and bleeds, especially when it's in your brain. So they're not very common. It's a lot like an aneurysm, but it's come from birth rather than formed over time. So it turns out I had those. When they went in to remove them, I flatlined twice. And at that point, they said, this is way too risky because surgery wasn't what it is today. We're talking, 30 years ago now. We've come quite far in our medical technology, which is great. But back then, the focus was, let's just get her back together, keep her alive, and we'll work out what to do later. Because they were losing me on the table, they found other malformations when they went in to get this big one that was bleeding out. So then I woke up. I'd had, like I said, a massive stroke. So I was completely paralyzed down the left side of my body. I'd obviously had surgery, so I had this big surgical scar. I was dependent on other people for every single thing in my life at that point. And I was there lying in the bed going, woohoo, this is perfect. This is exactly what was meant to happen. Everything is good. On we go. And that's basically what happened. I then had quite a physical journey in terms of recovery, learning how to walk, how to talk, how to do anything for myself. We had the remaining malformations there, so it was what do we do with them? Because from that point on, I was kind of a walking time bomb. That wasn't a medical diagnosis, but that is kind of what they said to me. I was told I was never allowed to get my heart rate up. I couldn't be active. I couldn't be excited. I mean, I was going to struggle to be active anyway because I couldn't walk or really move a whole lot. But as I started to heal and get better, it was don't get your heart rate up. Don't laugh. Don't do anything that might increase the blood flow because that could burst another one. My mother talks about how I couldn't walk in a straight line because I'd have to walk on my hands up the side of the couch. I'd have to jump over the coffee table just to get to the kitchen. I couldn't just walk there. I had to do it in like 16 different ways, all put together. So telling a child who is that active, you can't get your heart rate up or any of your blood flow up was incredibly difficult. So I was put into a life for a little while, only a little while, where I basically was afraid to do anything. I just sat there or lay in the bed and tried not to move too much because I didn't want it to happen again. Because if it happened again, there was a pretty low chance I'd make it. But at the same time, I felt like everything's great, we'll be fine. So yeah, I went on this very physical journey of healing and repair. And the great news is that today I've pretty much got everything back. Not completely. I no longer have fine motor movement in my left hand. Go through shoes. I walk with a slight limp. So left shoes get worn down really quickly. I've got heaps of perfect condition right shoes. The left ones, not so much. So, it's quite nice. Means I get to buy more shoes. But apart from that, there are different things. I've got spatial issues and fatigue and stuff like that, but I can live a normal life, completely normal life. And, that's really great. Going from the prognosis of we don't know if she'll make it to she may never walk again to we actually don't know what's going to happen for her. And then I had seizures. I ended up having to go and have radiation therapy to get the other malformations out. And it kind of just kept going for a good couple of years there. So going from that to where I am today, I've got a beautiful daughter. They said, she'll never have children. That's way too risky. Thanks to medical technology, I've got my daughter. I can drive a car. I go to the gym. I can live life like other people. And I'm on a mission to truly live life, to squeeze the juice out of this life and make the most of it because we can't take life for granted. Yeah, that's my story summed up.
Oh my goodness. I don't know about you, Kathleen. I had such a hard time listening to you describe that place that you went. I just felt almost like a desperation. And this is my question for you. Were you scared when you were hearing the voice and you knew you needed to squeeze the hand or you were trying to squeeze your father's hand? Were you scared? Because I would think for a 12-year-old, that would be really scary, but you didn't seem to describe it that way. So how did it feel?
I had no fear whatsoever. I had confusion. Oh, and I need to clarify. Okay, so I woke up from this. I'm there in critical care, and it took me a little while to work out what to do with this because I had this experience, and I remember thinking, where did the white light go? Where did these beings go? And over the next little while, I thought, okay, it must have been when I was in the surgery. You know how you see on TV shows? That's all my reference was at that age. People come in when people are really sick and they sit by the bedside and they hold their hand and they say, squeeze my hand if you can hear me, and all of these things. I just figured I'd had a classic case of that. So then when my father came in, it wasn't straight away because there's quite a lot for both of us to deal with. A little while later, I said to him, were you there? Did you squeeze my hand and were you talking to me? And he said, no, I didn't go in. And I said, no, you must have. He said, no, I didn't. But do you remember? And we had a family friend and she would come in every day because they were like very, very close family. So they were allowed in where other visitors maybe wouldn't because they basically were family. She would come in and sit with me and sit by the bedside and she'd hold my hand and tell me all these stories and share things with me. She spent ages just being with me, which I so appreciate, even though I have no memory of that whatsoever. So he said, do you remember her coming in? I said, no, it was you. And he said, well, no, I didn't. He found the whole experience very traumatic and spent most of the time outside the hospital room just because it was too traumatic for him. Both my mother and my father were there. And apparently none of that had happened, but this other family friend had gone in and done that role because she felt that she could. And that, I'm really grateful that she supported my parents in that way. So that raised a question of, well, if it wasn't you, what happened there? I had so much confusion and just trying to work out how it happened. And I had no awareness of what a near-death experience was at this time. This is pre-internet. This is back in the days. I was 12 years old. People didn't talk about these things. If they did, they probably got put in a straitjacket or medicated or taken off to some kind of facility or something. So I became quite nervous to talk about it. I had no concept of a belief system. I didn't have any beliefs. I didn't know anything because I was only 12. So I decided to keep quite quiet about it. Sorry, I sidetracked there, clarifying that my father hadn't been there because it wasn't your classic squeeze my hand scenario. That was when I started to think what really happened here. But in answer to your question, at no point did I have any fear. It just was what it was. And I was only in the moment. And I don't know about you, but even today, here in this world, I can quite often be in the moment, but I can be in 10 other moments all at the same time. I'm thinking about what to do for dinner, what I did this morning, people I need to contact, emails I need to do. I can be in many moments all at once. But I remember so clearly just being absorbed in what was happening at that time. There was nothing else, but no fear, just confusion. What is going on? But not a lot of confusion, not confusion in a bad way. I felt very safe.
Oh, that's fascinating. I'm so glad that you did clarify because that's exactly what I thought. I thought, oh, her dad was there telling her that. And so that is, thank you.
Yeah, that makes a big difference.
Well, it did. That was the defining moment for me when I realized he hadn't been there because I just assumed that's what had happened. It hadn't. And also, if the experience had taken place when I'm flatlining on an operating table, there's no way that my father's in there while I'm being operated on. Did it happen when I originally heard that voice when I first fell into a coma? He wouldn't have been there either. So I've spent a bit of time trying to work out when he could have been there. He kind of couldn't because whilst I wasn't out of danger, I was in a coma for about a week afterwards. Whilst I wasn't out of danger, if that was when it happened, that wasn't the closest to death that I was. So I don't know. I don't quite know how he fits in. I feel today that maybe we've got some kind of spiritual connection. There's a lot that's there for me that I go, oh, that makes sense. But at the time, I really didn't understand. And it's actually only probably in the last 10 years that I've started to process how he could be part of my bigger spiritual group or that there is some kind of connection there. So who knows? I'll find out one day.
I have a question. Did you at any time share your experience about the white light at some point in the future after your experience? And secondly, how did that entire experience inform what you do now in your career, if I can say it that way? How did that all come together? I'm so curious about that.
I think it changed absolutely everything for me, but I'll start at your original question. So I woke up, did I tell anyone about it? When I realized that my father hadn't been there and I'd kind of seen this, I thought, well, maybe it's just the drugs, maybe it's just the medication. I was a little bit nervous to tell anyone about what had happened. I then started my physical journey trying to heal, and I put all my energy into that, feeling like everything was perfect and that I had to just get on with life. I felt very strongly that I had a big purpose to fulfill. I still don't know what that is, but I was on a mission to get better, and I tried so hard to make the quickest, strongest recovery I could. I was a real fighter back then. That's what they said, you're a fighter. It's probably some of that has come out of my gymnastic training. That's quite a disciplined sport, and so I think that really helped me in ways. And they kept saying, you only survived because you're so young. I was going, no, there's something bigger than that. I've got something I need to do, not knowing what that was. I waited for a little bit till I was a little bit healthier. I did tell, I think, my family that I'd had some kind of experience. I didn't feel that was received too well, coming from a family that was very atheist and that very clearly would say, when you die, there's nothing. And me wondering whether it was actually just the medication, the drugs that I was on, whether I'd hallucinated. I've asked every question there is under the sun around this. So then I learnt that actually this is a topic we don't talk about, and I held that in, for 27 years. So I'd had this experience, and there were a couple of people along the way I kind of hinted at that I'd had some kind of experience, but the focus was on the physical aspects, because that's what we're in, a physical world. We're in a very physical reality here. So I think everything was focused on the physical side of everything rather than the spiritual side. And again, I went straight back into being raised that, God doesn't exist. There is nothing. There's just this life. And as a 12-year-old, I didn't really think anything beforehand. This experience changed all of that, because the first place I wanted to go was a church. I was like, get me to a place that's connected to that white light. And I didn't know anything other than the concept of a church. And my best friend at the time, we were great childhood friends growing up. We're still very close, actually. Her family were very Christian, and they went to church, and she went to Sunday school every Sunday. I was never allowed to go. And that's just how it was. I thought, okay, well, their family believes in God and our family doesn't. But after my experience, there was this idea that I could believe in God even if my family doesn't. So that's where a lot of my, spiritual seeking started to happen, because I was so transformed after this experience. I just couldn't look at the world the same. And I was on a mission to complete this purpose that I had. Like, why didn't I die? Why didn't I die? I must have something to do. What is it? Along the way, obviously, I told when I met my husband and realized that that was a thing and that was getting quite serious. He probably needs to know about this experience that happened. So I told him. There are other people along the way who I did share little bits with. And so it was quite commonly known that I'd had something go on, but we didn't talk about it. And I felt shame. I felt embarrassment. It was quite a journey following all of this to get me to where I am today. It sounds easy, but there were many years of just going through the motions, and I woke up, I was dependent on everybody for everything. I felt like I was a burden. My family, trying to keep afloat financially, and, so they've got a child they need to look after 24/7. I was on 24/7 care. I couldn't be left alone in case I had a seizure. There were all these things. And so I look back and I think, man, my poor parents, they went through the ringer with that. It must have been so incredibly hard for them, emotionally, physically, but also just keeping day-to-day stuff going. It must have been so hard for them. So I didn't really talk about it. 27 years later, I felt this enormous pull to share my story. I remember the defining moment, I was driving my car. And it's funny because I look at all the research now, a few years down the track from this happening. A lot of our experiences happen when we're just about to fall asleep, or we're in a relaxed state, we're in meditation, or we're driving a car because we're almost on autopilot. So I remember I was driving my car and I had what I call a download. So like this message came and it was go and interview near-death experiences. And it was this voice. And I talk about the voice because I've got the voice. It's not the same voice that was in the bed saying don't go to sleep. It's not my dad's voice that was in my near-death experience. It's almost like it's the voice of God, of source, of future. I don't know what you call it, but it gives me information. Like I talk a lot about how we need to be open. If we can take time to sit and be still and open up and listen to the voice, what it's telling us. It's almost like our internal self, but it's separate to me. And the voice came and said, go and interview near-death experiences. And I thought, no way, no, not me, no. I haven't even shared my own, I don't want to talk about my experience, no. And I find it quite hard, even today, sharing this, I find this quite hard. And I thought, I don't know any near-death experiences. What the heck, how am I going to do this? But I know this voice well enough now that I can just obey it and get on with it. Or I can say no and deny it and be haunted by it. Haunted is the wrong word, but when something you just know you need to do something in life and you're like, no, I'll just push it to the side. Yeah, we're really good at that, aren't we? Because when we don't want to do something, we don't want to do something. So I didn't want to do this. I didn't even know how to do this. I had dabbled a little bit in podcasting because I was preparing myself at some point to talk about my story because this was coming up. I knew I had to write a book and share my story. And so I'd started interviewing other people to learn how to share my story, but I wouldn't say I was a podcaster. I wouldn't say I'd really traveled down that road very much. So I get this download, go and do it. So then I ended up just dabbling in a Facebook group that I'd been in for years and years and years, never commented. I'd read the posts, never show up. I was too embarrassed to show up there. I didn't want to be associated with it. And I just said, I feel like I'm meant to share stories of near-death experiences. Would anybody be willing to share a recorded conversation? I'm thinking, I don't even know where to put it. Who am I? I don't have this, but I knew that I would have to obey this voice because if I didn't, eventually, years down the track, I'd end up obeying it anyway. So I've learned that lesson the hard way. I ended up going, okay, I'll do it. So I put the message into Facebook saying, okay, I'm going to do this. And I went home and I told my husband. He came home from work and he said, how was your day? And I'm like, oh, it was all good. I was driving and I remember exactly where I was when I was driving when it happened. And I said, I feel like I'm meant to go and interview near-death experiences. And he just looks at me and he goes, of course you are. And I went, oh, great. Well, thanks for your support of getting out of this. So he was on board with it. He helped me with the technical side. I know it was almost frustrating. I was like, what do you mean? I thought you were going to be on my side of, well, you've got so much on your plate already. No, this isn't a good thing to do. Didn't see it that way. So I interviewed one person and then they said, oh, I've got a friend. And then it just started to snowball. And then now we're probably about 6 years down the track. And I'm still interviewing near-death experiences and having these amazing conversations. Not every week, but most weeks I'm releasing something. It's become one of the favorite parts of life. So even though I was afraid and pushing it away and going, no, not me, it's become one of the most amazing journeys I've been on. And it just really flows back to when we have those voices or those inklings to do something, how much I believe we need to follow them. We need to tune in and follow those things because they take us on the most exciting lifetime.
It's so remarkable. The voice, I totally get the voice. I have a voice too. So
you too.
Very cool. And so you have interviewed, I don't know, hundreds of people, would you say?
Yeah, I would. Interviewed hundreds. They're connected with thousands. A lot of stories. People might come to me with the first time saying, I don't know where to share this. Like me with my first time. It took me another 2 years from deciding to do it to actually doing it. I released the podcast and then the listeners started saying, but what about your story? We know you've had one. I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to do this. So it took me another 2 years. So a lot of people come to me who maybe aren't ready to go public with their story, but they just want to share it for the first time with someone. So obviously I don't release those. Yeah, I've come across thousands of experiences and released a couple of hundred stories.
I have to ask you, after hearing so many stories, what would you say is very consistent through the stories? What strikes you as very consistent? And then let's do the opposite. And what has really been remarkable or maybe rare? So, normally we hear about a tunnel and, the white light, and you didn't have a tunnel in your story. So that was kind of a little bit different. What are you hearing about a lot, very in common? And then the flip side, what have you rarely heard?
The common themes. So there are some very common things. You're right. People talk about the tunnel. They talk about the white light. Not everybody has those things. So what I would probably say is these experiences are very, very unique. They're very personal. There are themes, but there's things that happen for people that don't happen for other people, things that are more common. So very common is the tunnel, is feeling like you no longer have a body, which was interesting because I couldn't connect with my body. So feeling like your energy, or people use the word orb quite a bit. They feel like they are an orb of energy rather than a human and physical body. The body is no longer a thing quite often. The most common theme is it's all about love. This whole experience is about love, that we are love, that we're all connected. We are one. We must treat each other with love. We must give love. It's all about how we look at love, and there's self-love in there. There's love for others. There's respect. There's collaborating in love. It's all about love. So that probably is the biggest theme that comes out of these experiences is it's all about love from what I've heard. A lot of people get a choice about whether they come back or not. So they might have what we call a life review. And that is where, the saying, you saw your life flash before your eyes, and people talk about that right before they maybe die or they're in an accident or something like that. This is a very similar concept, except it isn't quite flash before your eyes. It's like you see your whole life and you relive all of your life from all of the different angles. So if you have a conversation or you have an argument with someone, for example, you will relive that as yourself on your side having the argument, as the other person having the argument, as anybody who's a bystander hearing the argument. You go through all of the experiences from all perspectives. And apparently, I didn't have one of these. Apparently, these are just the ultimate learning lesson. There's no judgment of you did that wrong, you were at fault there. It's like you are judging yourself, and that's quite common for people to have life reviews where they go through their whole life. It's some people get ideas out of those life reviews of what they did, maybe, I'm not going to say wrong, but what they could have done better, what would be more connected to their purpose. Some people get told you have a choice, you can go back or you can stay. Very hard to understand how many people have that, because we don't know about people that stay. Did they get a choice, or did they just have no choice? Did they just die? So some people get a choice to come back. Some people preview the future in terms of, there was one lady I spoke with, she got to see her children in the future. If she died and stayed there in this beautiful place, she saw the lives of her family in the future and the future generations, what that would look like and what it would look like if she went back. And she chose to go back for her children. So selfless. And again, it's about love. It's always about love. That's always the underlying thing. So some people get a glimpse into future events, what might happen. Some people have these life reviews where they see their whole life and then come back. Other people like myself, I never had the choice. So I question, was I not so deep in the experience? I don't know. How do you define that? I don't know. I think there's probably different layers of death, different layers of existence. And so we go through these different layers of existing as a human, existing as a spirit, soul, who we authentically are. You've got the tunnel. That's a very common one. Feeling that your energy, feeling life reviews, choices. Some people come back with spiritual gifts. And so this might be where they can perceive things. They might be a seer. They can have spiritual gifts where they can see beings or spiritual entities around them. Others have like mediumship abilities. They can see things that are coming. There's all sorts of spiritual gifts, a lot around energy. A lot of people have misfiring electrical connections. So what I'm talking about there is they might wear a watch and the watch will continuously stop. And I don't know how much this works. I'd love to know actually, smartwatches, whether they've actually, it's reduced the amount of time that this happens with a smartwatch. But with the old battery watches, where you had to wind them up, quite often the watch would stop. You go get a new battery. It would last for a couple of hours and then it would stop. You go get the watch serviced, nothing wrong with the watch, put a new battery in, it'll stop. Lights flickering, so walking down the road and the street lights will go on or off depending on where you are. People's TVs and radios come on, and radio frequency, because, you know, I believe we are energy. If you're around a radio based on where you are, you can actually change the frequency of the radio, can interfere. People have all sorts of electrical things that go on, so that's quite interesting from people with near-death experiences. There are all sorts of themes. There's spiritual gifts, being able to see things, being able to understand what's going to happen for other people in the future, or healing abilities, gifts of healing, gifts of channeling. There's so much that happens there. And so I guess these are probably more of the common ones, but remembering that the foundation seems to be it's all about love. And that can be really hard because self-love can play a massive part in that. You know, we can give and be the most generous, loving people to everybody else. But if we don't have self-love, is that truly love? It's not that people come back and have almost like I need to give up everything and just serve the world, because there's self-love as well. Some people come back with a very strong sense of purpose. They know exactly what they need to do. Others come back and find that they can no longer fit back into this world. And one of the guests that I had on, she talked about how it's like a jigsaw puzzle. And you know, when you've got a piece and you can't quite, it's slightly above, it doesn't quite click right in. She said it's like that. I can't quite fit back in. I'm the right shape, I'm in the right puzzle, I'm in the right place, but I just don't quite fit back in. So people come back and they find they can no longer fit back into their profession or even their marriage. Unfortunately, there's a really, really high divorce rate for near-death experiences. Not because they come back and they're unhappy people, or, you know, it's just that they can't fit back in. They've changed so significantly and yet they look exactly the same. They just can't fit back in, just like that piece of the puzzle. So people do have significant transformation when they have these experiences. They come back and they can't quite drop back into where they were. So lots and lots of themes. I've only touched on a few there. I will say not all experiences are positive. There are some experiences which are potentially quite fearful. They're quite upsetting experiences. People can come back with a little bit of PTSD from a negative experience. But I'm yet to find anybody who's been through a negative near-death experience and didn't get through to a point of love at the end where it was okay. So again, there's a lot of themes based on belief systems, and what I believe is that you will come across what will resonate with you and make you feel safe and secure in your experience. The majority, however, there are some negative ones as well, but I think the majority of it is they are positive, they're loving, they're caring. You connect with your belief system, whatever your beliefs are, whether you're Christian, you want to, you know, you'll see Jesus or see someone based from your belief system. That will happen to bring that comfort and that recognition of this is a safe space.
So interesting. So what is the flip side of that? What are the things that you've noted that are unusual or remarkable that really stand out?
There are some really remarkable stories. I've heard stories of people meeting people within their experience, and they come back and then it's almost like it was a preview of something that was going to happen here. People come back and, like I'm saying, you can't quite fit back in. I've heard there was one story in particular which really blew my mind. I found it fascinating, of a lady who believes that actually she's in parallel universes and we have different incarnations. So we could, you know, there's so many topics associated to the topic of near-death experiences, because we talk about coming back, that leads into life and death and reincarnation and all of these amazing topics that lead on to 100 other topics. But if you were to look at perhaps we're living multiple lives across different times. Are we just in this lifetime, or are we spread across different lifetimes all at the same time? Are we in different dimensions? A lot of people come back with an understanding of other dimensions. A lot of people go out to the ends of the universe and come back with ideas around Earth itself and different possibilities that there are. So this one lady believed that she was living across multiple parallel universes at the same time in different incarnations, but that there was two of her incarnating in this world, and that she had bumped into her other incarnation. So she saw her other part of herself. And I'm just like, wow, this is amazing. Because how do we know that this is all it is? How do we know that Earth is actually all we've got going on? There is no time. And that's the thing when they're in these experiences. And for me as well, in the experience, I couldn't tell you how long I was there. Time was, it's almost like it didn't exist. There is no time. So if we look at life and time, and you consider life, death, and the concept of coming back, reincarnating, or living multiple lifetimes, there is no time. So it's all happening all at once. Who's to say we're not going to bump into a former self or a future self or something of us at one time? So this happened for this lady, and that blew my mind that that could happen. So a lot of people come back with ideas around time itself. What is time? Purpose, living across multiple layers all at the same time. Reincarnation, this was a really interesting one, because one person I talked to, actually, it was his wife that had the near-death experience. They'd made a pact that they would communicate to each other after they died. She died first. She had had a near-death experience, but then a little while later, she actually did die, and she came back to talk to him. And she taught him a whole lot of things, talked about different lessons around life and living, and she talked about reincarnation. And then he believes that she reincarnated into a baby that was born down the road. So then I went, well, hang on a minute, what happens to her? Does she no longer exist? So how much of who we are, I'm going to call it a soul, our energy, our entity, how much of this incarnates into who we are, and how much goes back? And then can we incarnate into different amounts? I spoke to somebody else who has a theory that we can incarnate maybe 20% to 5 people all at once, or perhaps we've got smaller incarnations in different lifetimes and they're happening all at once. And so it asks a lot of really big questions around reincarnation, and I can see your eyes, you're trying to follow along with this, and I'm not doing a great job at explaining it, but the topic's so big, so vast.
Believe me, I'm with you all the way on this. So
okay, good.
I am too, Kirsty. The expression on my face is just because one thing leads to 10 more, and then those things lead to 100 more. So I'm just over here going, oh my gosh. So I'm with you, but wow.
I know.
We could just go, like you're saying, off into so many different places.
So many places.
Another thing I thought while you were talking, so a percentage of me is still back where you were talking about the woman who could see the children. If she stayed on the other side, that whole thing. And it made me think of that It's a Wonderful Life movie, and how he could see how life would be for people if he, wasn't around to do things throughout his life. And that brought me to the fate question with the free will question, because isn't that a whole nother thing?
Oh, definitely.
What is worked out and what is free will and choice, and wow. So my mind's just smoke's coming out of my ears, I think.
And that happens to me on such a regular basis. I think, I've been researching this heavily for so many years, and then something will come in and I'm just like, wow, my world just totally changed. Like my whole process, there's so much I need to think about. Free will, this is one of my favorite topics. How much free will do we have? Do we choose our life before we come here? Because I've been asked quite a few times, do you think your near-death experience was something that happened to you, or was it pre-planned before you came? My answer is, as a 12-year-old, I think it was pre-planned. I don't think I had any choice. I think it was going to happen regardless. I think at 12 years old, it just was there. It was something that was going to happen, and it did happen. But you look at the important moments in our life. Are they pre-planned? Did we choose them before we come? That leads into questions like, do we choose our family before we come? Yeah, how much free will do we have? So if we've got significant events that are going to happen in our life, we've got to get to those significant events, and that we get to them by following a certain path. Whatever choices we make, every little choice, every day, I think the little things are the big things. But if we need to have the car accident because that's defined and that's something that's pre-planned, we need to go through all the process of wanting to have a car, learning how to drive, getting our hands on a car, being available that day to be in the car, to take that, leave the house at that time, to sit at that traffic light, to have the truck come. And I think about everything that takes place. That seems to just happen, but do we plan all those little tiny events that get to the big one that is the actual planned event? I don't know. How much choice do we have? How much freedom do we actually have here? And I talk to a lot of experiences about that, and the feeling tends to be there's probably significant things that happen, and in between the significant things, we've got freedom and choice, and we've actually got quite a bit of free will, which is where we have our learning experience, which is why we're here in this physical realm having our learning experience. And so we can choose what that learning experience looks like, whether we're subconsciously choosing it or not. I don't know. I assume we probably are. But it seems to be that there are significant things that happen. Some near-death experiences believe that they had their experience as a wake-up call because they were so far off the track from where they needed to be in this lifetime, that they'd wandered, they'd followed other things, not listened to those inner promptings, not listened to that voice. And I believe we all have a voice. We just need to sit down and tune into it. And I make that sound really easy. I'm aware for some of it's not. But we all have the voice. And so people say to me, I had my experience because I had traveled so far away from who I needed to be in this lifetime. That was the thing that was going to shake me up. And then maybe that's where they have this life review, or they see what their children's lives would be like, see things that will happen in the future if they don't come back, or if they do come back. Who knows? I mean, we don't know. I believe mine was pre-planned.
There's a saying I just used it the other day when I was working with a client. The universe has shaken you to awaken you. And it's basically what you just said. It will start with a little nudge, a little like, hey, a little poke, a little nudge. Then the nudge turns to a bit of a push. And then the push may be a shove. And then before you know it, you get the cosmic slap upside the head that you cannot ignore.
Exactly.
That's how I see it.
That's kind of how I see it. I feel like when I was talking about when I was driving my car and I got this message to go and to do the podcast, exactly what you're talking about. I can ignore the nudge, I can ignore all this, but eventually I'm going to get that slap and I will end up doing it anyway. So totally agree with what you're saying there. Love that. Yeah.
It happens. I think it happens to all of us. And I think the NDEs, whether they're pre-planned or not, I think in your case, I would agree with you. Probably pre-planned, but maybe some of the ones that weren't were a result of someone being really far away from where they needed to be. So it's kind of like the cosmic slap, knocking you back on track. But I don't know. These are huge existential questions, right?
They are. I don't think we'll know the answers.
No, we don't.
They're such big questions. And then also, I think we need to recognize that with medical technology and advancements in medical things at the moment, we are having so many more near-death experiences than what we would have 50, 100 years ago, because back then there wasn't the medical technology to keep people alive. So they probably would have died. So I think about how the spiritual, I can't remember the word you just used, the spiritual world, almost like it needs to factor in technology. So if we've pre-planned to have a near-death experience, and the technology is going to keep advancing, and it's almost like the spiritual experiences need to weave in with technological experiences. And I know that doesn't even make sense, and that spiritual is probably so much more advanced than technology. But
it makes sense.
Yeah, for me, it makes sense. And I think also the sharing of experiences, because like I say, when I had mine, there was no internet back in those days. We didn't even have cell phones. And so you look at that. now there's so much more sharing. So back then, if I was to able in my hospital bed to be able to jump onto a laptop and Google what had happened, I might have come to the realization and the openness about it so much sooner than waiting the 27 years before I could even cope with coming out about this in public. Life is changing, technology is changing, which is having an impact on how we can view things spiritually and collaborate and see things, because we know we're not alone anymore. There's more and more sharing that goes on. The world is just constantly changing.
Absolutely.
I'm so fascinated, Kirsty. My mind is just racing one thing after another. You've just brought up so many amazing things. Oh my gosh, I can't believe our time is about up. Kathleen.
I know.
I'm sure that you're probably over there too with a million more questions.
I am. And, Kirsty, these are topics that Andrea and I have discussed ad nauseum between ourselves and with our other guests. But it's so fascinating. And talking about this with you just has opened the proverbial can of worms where we could just sit here and just say, to heck with it. Let's just sit here and talk about this for the next 3 days and see what we come up with. Of course, that's not very doable, but, it would be awesome because I get so animated talking about these things, and I can tell you do, and I know Andrea does. But unfortunately, we, unlike spirit, are constrained by time in this world. So we do have to rein ourselves in, even though we may not want to.
I know, and there's so many topics. We could talk for 3 days straight. You're absolutely right, Kathleen.
Please tell us about your podcast so our listeners can go tune in and get more.
Yeah, so the podcast is called Let's Talk Near Death, and it purely is talking about life, death, and experiences in between. So we focus mostly on near-death experiences. We've done a season around death itself, what it's like to die, what are the moments of dying. My work as an end-of-life doula, and with people who are close to death, get to ask a lot of great questions. But yeah, I've interviewed some leading researchers in the moments of death and found that absolutely fascinating. We've talked about after-death communication, all of these beautiful, juicy topics. And like you say, we've opened a can of worms because there are so many topics there. So yeah, let's talk near death. And I just love to delve a bit deeper and understand how death impacts how we live. For me, it impacted my life so greatly. People ask what I do and I say, I talk about death, and they think that's really negative. And I go, no, not in a negative way. I also run a death cafe, and we often leave laughing. We just leave on a high, everyone there. And you think a death cafe where you come together for coffee and cake and talk about death and dying, it sounds so negative, but actually there's so much freedom that comes out of these conversations. So I greatly appreciate what you ladies are doing and creating the space to be able to come and talk about it, because I think the end of is the way we look at death and how we can talk about it truly impacts the way that we can live.
Absolutely. Shining a light on these topics makes all the difference. It helps to release some of the fear surrounding death, and gives an idea of what it's really like and not what we've conditioned to believe it is. And that's really important. It's something we're all going to experience.
None of us are getting out of here alive.
Exactly.
That's true.
Exactly. So with that being said, Kirsty, it has been wonderful. I really appreciate you sharing your time with us and your knowledge and your experience. It's been a true pleasure.
Thank you so much. And I love coming on and having these conversations. So I greatly appreciate this. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're so welcome, Kirsty. Thank you.
Till the next time, take good care.
We thank you again for joining us. And of course, we invite you to join us next time as we journey beyond the Reiki Gateway with Kathleen Johnson and Andrea Kennedy.